Just on that point, actually, you have a good technical knowledge of how information is stored, and that are there instances where that knowledge and knowing how databases are structured and email systems work, etc., have helped you to overcome the obstacles?
Well, I think I've been doing these requests, the digital-oriented ones, because the amount of databases the government has is significant. I believe a lot of the information is on the databases. Why it's sitting behind a wall over there, in that department, and not out in the public domain, I don't understand. So I search for it. I think the fact that it's digitally recorded actually leads to something that wasn't expected, was that when you start putting all this stuff on databases like Oracle databases and SAP databases, that it makes it, and because it's digital records and it's just as accessible under the Act as physical records, then it makes it easier in a way, because you can actually just say, well, give me the database. Instead of saying, I'd like John O'Donoghue expenses, I'd like the expenses of all of the staff at the Department of Arts and Tours. I think it's unexpected. I think it wasn't envisaged when they started doing this process that the databases themselves would be accessible.
I'd just like to make a point that the legislation requires that the public bodies give the person seeking the information, it imposes on them a duty to provide reasonable assistance. And the question is whether simply sending things on paper when its basic form is digital is reasonable assistance in the circumstances. I reckon by the time we get this issue to the High Court will say, no, it's not reasonable assistance. But since this issue is going to take a long time to get to the High Court, this kind of stonewalling will continue until somebody does get there. Gavin?
Someday.
Thank you. There's another question from Eoin, I believe. If we don't have Eoin.
Should we read one for Sean, one for Gavin? First, Gavin, have you ever acquired a list of their list of databases?
I use the e-tenders website to go through all the tenders that are awarded for all the database procurement. So when a department is putting out to find out to install a financial management system, usually they'll have a tender for it, and there's a record on the e-tenders website for we got Oracle in to do when we installed our systems. So that's what I use. Some departments will keep lists of databases, and it's getting lists of lists are usually a good place to start in terms of if you want to see how a department is structured. There's also, on the same level, the Section 15 and Section 16 reference books under the Act, where every 3 years bodies are obliged to publish documents that basically tell you what information they hold. Some departments are better than others at doing that every 3 years. But the best example to me was the Department of Justice would have on its Section 15 document a list of all the databases that it has, but it's not on their website. They tell you on the website to go to your local Garda station or library to find that document. I believe, and I'm looking at the website going, and they could have easily put the PDF up, but they didn't. And it's that kind of the idea of what you're saying of lists of those kind of things is readily available, but the departments don't generally publish them.
Sean, do you go to the departmental FOI officers or have them in to show them your ethos and point of view of legislation?
We present and speak to different fora at different times, so that would be an issue. We also provide our people to contribute to civil service FOI training, so we cover it in that way. What we also do is we try and engage on a case-by-case basis. If we see an issue in how a case was handled, then we deal with it there and then. If we feel the need, then we comment on that in our decision, and most of our decisions go on the web. If it's of such significance that we think it's worthy of comment, we may do it either in our annual report or issue a standalone press release about it. So there's different levels at which we engage on that. But our most regular one would be we would provide a speaker for training of public service FOI officers to, when a person is getting their first FOI training, that they have an input from us so they're at least aware of what our role is.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, just one question.
Gillian and the gentleman in front.
What's the repercussions, besides being published in the report, for departments that don't comply?
We have, the Commission has a number of powers, including of her own volition she can instigate an investigation into any aspect of a public body's work as regards FOI. So that power is there. However, the reality is that that's an intensive, resource-intensive process, so we need to be careful about which cases we pick. And we keep that under review. And if it's our view that something is of such significance that it would justify removing our officers from casework to put on some other work, then we would do it. We have done a number of cases, but it's infrequent, and we do it on a case-by-case basis. But the Commission does have those powers, yes.
Thank you, Sean. Gillian, and the gentleman in front of Gillian there, yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered what was this for the 2003 amendment? Also, you talking about some of the, challenges. For example, you said talking about fees. I mean, is there any potential of another amendment in your opinion in the next years?
Well, in my opinion, no. I don't see the FY Act being changed in the lifetimes of current government. I don't see it being further changed in the lifetimes of current government, and that would be the Commissioner's view. As regards the impetus behind the 2003 Act, what was stated on the record at the time was that there was a concern about excessively time-consuming requests, either by waste of volume or else requests have been vexatious. And the Commissioner's view on that is that those provisions are adequately provided for in the 1998 legislation. There is ample protection for public bodies on those fronts, so there is no need to amend the Act on those points. So therefore, as to why it was deemed necessary to amend the Act is for the political class to answer.
I think the Labour Party in their manifesto promised to basically get rid of the 2003 amendment and go back to the original Act in relation to the records. Sorry, I'm after losing my train of thought there. I won't. Yeah, the Labour Party. I think under the current government in relation to the 2003 amendment, it was politically motivated. It was the heads of, I think it was the Secretary Generals of the departments at the time. It was the 5 year was just about to run out in April. The legislation was passed. It was also to do with one of the examples I think I read in the Oireachtas debates at the time was that somebody had asked for all the diaries of a minister, which is essentially what I'm doing. I'm just doing it spread out over 7 or 8 months, and that was used as an example of a vexatious or voluminous request. But the Act, as Sean says, allows for that to be cited by an FY, so they can say, well, that's a voluminous request. Here's how you should change it in order for it not to be a voluminous request. So to me, the entire argument around fees was all spurious. It was all based on nonsense, essentially.
Very good, thank you. Question from Lee.
Okay, just a really quick follow-up on that question. In terms of the meta list of FOI requests that you FOI, how many of those would you judge to have been sort of silly or not really in the interest of the public? And we could often cite things like FOI requests that ask for the Minister to have breakfast, but how many of those were actually in those lists of freedom of information?
Well, from the logs that I've got logs of about 5 or 6 public bodies covering 3 or 4 years each per body. All the requests are generally, a lot of them are from journalists. I mean, I know that the figures are I think it's 20% of requests about it from journalists.
But less than that, but more than it was.
More than it was, but the requests are generally very well written and very well phrased. I don't see that many voluminous requests, but you probably know more about voluminous requests.
Well, there would be a number of voluminous ones, but I would say a very, very small number of vexatious ones, in my opinion. But again, I have to qualify my remarks by saying we see a 3 to 4% sample. But on the ones that I've seen, yes, we have come across some ones that I would accept could have been vexatious. What's more common would be voluminous requests. But again, I can understand why somebody puts in a broadly worded request because they want to capture particular records and they're concerned that a public body may judiciously interpret the wording to exclude those records. So they ask the whole shooting match. I spent a lot of my time talking with both applicants and public bodies to try and narrow the scope of requests. If both parties can agree to focus on what the applicant is really interested in, we can get it done much quicker for them. However, it depends on both parties being prepared for different reasons to do that. But we have made a number of decisions where we simply found that requests are excessively voluminous.
We've got 2 more questions first, and then we'll begin summing up. I'm going to throw some questions at the panel, which will help us then to sum up our thoughts from the whole evening session. So first of all, this gentleman here.
Question for Gavin. What's been the average retrieval fee that departments or agencies give you? And slightly disingenuous question, what's been the most excessive or what's been the largest retrieval fee that you've got?
in terms of the cost, the specific cost of getting information, so you have the €15 request up front. And then once you have specified records that you're looking for, a department will come back to you and say, right, we're going to say that that's €60, so it's going to take a civil servant X number of hours, and it's €20 an hour to get that information. And there might be different elements of my request, and they'll say that bit is €60, that bit is €100, that bit is €200. I think what was the most excessive request?
The biggest retrieval fee you've ever.
I think one of the ones I did was for I was getting all the expense claims of all the TDs and senators for the last 12 years, and what I did was I spread it out over multiple requests in order for it not to be voluminous. And initially, when I asked for all of it, because I didn't believe it was voluminous because half of it is held electronically anyway, I said, well, I'd like the expense claims from 1998 to 2008, and the initial search and retrieval fee on that was €2,300. So obviously I wasn't going to pay that, so I said, right, give me the first 3 years first, then I'll do 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, all the way back. So the whole thing ended up costing about €100 instead of the €2,300. And what's the most recent one with the Department of Enterprise, it wasn't that it was a search and retrieval fee, but what I was told was if we were to go down this road and give you a search and retrieval fee, it would be €29,000. And I kind of didn't agree with the premise of most of them. Maybe one of them was voluminous, but and would justify the search and retrieval. But other ones, simple things like looking for a diary over 2 years of a minister and being charged, something that's usually held in Outlook on a computer, and it's important to say, and this is something a lot of departments I've noticed myself with my colleagues who are journalists. Redaction, the process of redacting information, doesn't fall under search and retrieval. And a lot of people don't know that, and I have had this experience with the Department of Health, where I said I'd like the diary of Mary Harney from 2009, and they said that'll be €160. And I said, for what? And they said, well, we have to spend time redacting it. And I was like, you can't charge for redaction. So I don't know how many times the Department of Health have done that to other people and said, we're charging for redaction. I was like, no, you can't do that. I think generally search and retrieval doesn't really come up. For a lot of my requests, search and retrieval doesn't come up. But for some of them, if you chat to the FY officer and the decision maker within the department, they'll generally be fine, and they'll explain to you how the record is held. You're like, oh, it's in a filing system, we have to go through this process to get it, and you're like, okay, I can understand that. But when it's electronic records, it's a little more difficult to understand in terms of click print, what's the problem.